Hello, thank you for tuning into the Talking Issues series. My name's Curt Pringle, and it's good to talk about public policy issues here in Southern California. But part of everything we do is based around our community, and one of the most important things in the community are those nonprofits that serve people within our communities. And I have always had this affinity to the Boys and Girls Club and the operations of, how they address children's needs within our individual cities. And during the 2000s, when I was mayor, I had a good connection to the Anaheim Boys and Girls Club. But times change over 10 years, 20 years. And today I'm really seeing an exciting kind of a rebranding of the concept of Boys and Girls Clubs and our communities. And it's taken place here in Orange County at the Central Orange Coast Boys and Girls Club led by Robert Santana. So thank you very much for being here as the CEO of that organization.
Curt, thank you so much for the invitation and for always being such a great ambassador for kids
Yeah,
at the Boys and Girls Club.
thanks. And you're doing a great job. I mean, part of this that, I just keep thinking about is how different structures change with time. And we always get that. And there's things that have impacted those changes over the last couple of years, COVID probably being one of the biggest ones. But in terms of that city by city service that there are Boys and Girls Clubs in nearly every city. And today, a lot of those clubs are struggling. And what you have been able to do is keep that same mission, but to grow through mergers. And I think right now you serve in 8 different cities. And by the way, I want this to be a test because I think I can say Irvine, Costa Mesa, Santa Ana,
Start counting too. Yeah. All right.
Orange, Anaheim, Cypress, and Buena Park.
Hit every one of them. That's incredible. I usually have to, while I was saying it, I have to count them on my finger.
And I didn't look at my notes, but a lot of that came together through merging as you are bringing your model and service and fundraising and community engagement side into each of those cities. So tell me how that all came to be.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And again, you get 100% out of 100 for that listing. So, I'll start very briefly with, my first experience at the Boys and Girls Club in Santa Ana 21 years ago. 21 years ago this summer, I walked in thinking I was, going to spend a couple weeks volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club. And here I am 21 years later, still learning about the mission, and I'm very fortunate to be the leader of the organization. So, I walked in and I tell people all the time, the biggest strength that we have as a Boys and Girls Club is that we've been around for as long as we have.
Right.
Our biggest vulnerability as a Boys and Girls Club is that we've been around for as long as we have. And so we're an 82-year-old organization, and I like to think of ourselves as an 82-year-old startup. So, we want to leverage the history, all of the people that have come before us, the legacy of our brand, the, hundreds of thousands of young people that have come through our doors over all those years, all the volunteers and board members and donors who have supported the mission of Boys and Girls Clubs, while at the same time reminding ourselves that we serve kids, and every generation of kids is different and needs something different. So we have to always kind of stay ahead of that and continue to evolve. So I was the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Ana for, I believe, about 15 years before we did our first merger. And, we had developed really good strategy and culture and systems. And the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Ana at that time was considered to be one of the premier Boys and Girls Clubs in the country, both from a, impact standpoint. We're very entrepreneurial. We were the first Boys and Girls Club in the country to build a clinic, at a Boys and Girls Club facility in partnership with Children's Hospital of Orange County. We had kind of innovative models. And it's at the time, especially, we were teaching kids coding and introducing robotics very early on in that model. But we had this real kind of, strategic moment with our board where we were asking ourselves, where are we going with this, right? And as an entrepreneur, I was really looking at scalability and sustainability of our mission. And so I presented this idea around strategic growth through mergers. And, as you can imagine at that time, especially, mergers between nonprofits wasn't kind of the common, practice.
Right. Why? Because they only have one CEO at every organization.
Yeah, there's currently, there's almost 5,000 Boys and Girl Clubs in the country right now, serving almost 5 million kids. And that model, it's a federated model. So it's independent organizations. We're all affiliated to each other. We've worked very closely and collaborate. We leverage each other. There's a national organization that serves the Boys and Girls Club locally, but that's kind of the model. And it works because every community is different and needs different resources. But in certain markets, us being segmented in a community sometimes creates, unintended competition. It creates confusion between funders. And so, we had this idea and really looking at what would it look like if and that doesn't mean that we think that every Boys and Girls Club should merge, but we had this idea around, looking at the mission through kind of a larger, lens. And so our first merger was with the Boys and Girls Club of the Harbor area, which had clubs in Costa Mesa, Irvine, and Newport Beach. And that organization at that time was struggling. You would think that in the cities like Newport Beach, Costa Mesa, Irvine, this would be one of the wealthiest, strongest Boys and Girls Clubs. But at the time, it was struggling financially. Buildings were neglected. It wasn't in a growth pattern by any means.
Right.
And so that first merger, in hindsight, it's worked out really well. But it was such a huge undertaking. It was such a huge, risk to everyone because, all we had was kind of this concept. And so what we knew was that if we combined our strength, right, of our boards, the strength of our staff, and we created a larger vision, that it would inspire people to be involved. It would allow us to create more business efficiencies, and more importantly, it would allow us to serve more kids. And so within the first 2 years, we saw, fundraising increase because there was a kind of a more kind of well-rounded and, bold vision for the future of Orange County. There were business efficiencies. I think that one merger had almost $750,000 in cost savings when you eliminate the redundancy of executives and things like that. And then we just, our approach to leading nonprofits is social entrepreneurship. So us just being really smart about how to run the business. So within the first 2 years, we saw attendance go up. We saw relationships improve. We saw fundraising increase. We raised about almost $8 million to renovate all the facilities. And in doing so, it strengthened the reputation, the trust, and allowed us to do more.
And when you did that, you were sharing with me earlier that you really did want to ensure that you maintained that local identity of that club, even though you had a Orange County mothership, so to speak. But in fact, having two of the largest cities in the county as a part of that 4-city group at that time,
right,
you still wanted to have that identity.
Some of the best ideas I've ever had are just chicken scratch on a piece of paper, right? And so as we were going through that, one of the things that I was struggling with was if we introduce a regional brand, I think we lose our local identity. And that's what makes every successful Boys and Girls Club successful is...
And a trusting parent.
Correct.
I mean, they're going to the Santa Ana Boys and Girls Club. I know where they are. I know, who those people are.
And so we literally sketched it out and said, all right, we're going to have a regional brand that is the Boys and Girls Club of Central Orange Coast, but we want to maintain the local identity, the local presence, the local relationships. So we kept the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Ana brand. We introduced the Boys and Girls Club of Irvine, the Boys and Girls Club of Newport Beach, and the Boys and Girls Club of Costa Mesa brands that had never been used. And that way, every local community had their local Boys and Girls Club. And what it allowed us to do is to create this unique model where we have a regional infrastructure for quality control, for safety, for leadership, all this, the strength of a large organization, but the focus and the discipline and the heart of a local community-driven group. And what that has also allowed us to do with other mergers is that as we've merged with other Boys and Girls Clubs, we also merged with a non-Boys and Girls Club a couple years ago, was we can preserve their identity, their legacy, their brand, and ensure that while we add regional, muscle to that organization, we're still preserving what the sole purpose was when those organizations were founded.
And what the next big merger was Anaheim and Cypress. city of Cypress and Anaheim had merged before, so now that was one entity, or maybe there was one in between there. But
We had a merger with a nonprofit called Youth Employment Services. Yes, and they were a workforce development organization, a 52-year-old workforce development organization, and we as a Boys and Girls Club have done that type of
well,
work.
no, I know that one because one of the key people around this place, Zishan Yunus, is that was one of his passions. And
Yeah,
was involved there.
that was a great opportunity for us to enhance the mission and the kind of the program offering of the Boys and Girls Club, because yes, had done an incredible job in that space. Um, and again, we saw business efficiencies. They had a real strong reputation. Within the first year of that merger, we doubled the number of clients served with less than half of the budget that they had prior to it. Because when you can eliminate an office, lease and administrative costs and office supplies, things like that, all that gets redirected into program staff. So we were
You
able
had more offices, meeting those clubs, to be able to provide the service.
at this point, it's only been about 3 years. We have I think 5x'd the number of clients served than before that.
To about how many kids?
I think this year we're going to serve about, I think, 7 or 8,000 kids through that crazy workforce development model, and it continues to grow every year.
I guess part of thanks for saying that. Part of what I want people to hear through this is really that service delivery and those things that you provide to a community that they may not otherwise assume comes from the Boys and Girls Club.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to trample out some of those old ideas, which I certainly had, to see that growth and that inspiration.
That's a great, thank you for bringing that up. Uh, as an entrepreneur, I rarely kind of stick in a box, right? I like to know where the bumper guards are so that I can stay within certain guidelines, but we're always asking ourselves what else we could be doing. So a few years ago, as I was looking at what a traditional Boys and Girls Club does, right? We serve kids, school age kids, primarily during after school. If we would have stayed in that lane, we would be a great after school program. But we didn't stay in that lane. We really asked ourselves, what is our true mission here? And our mission isn't to be an after school program, right? It's to ensure that every young person has a mentor and a champion in life. And if I believe that to be true, which I do to the core of who I am, then my mission is to make sure that families who are raising their kids have a support system. That if we have a reputation and a brand like the Boys and Girls Club, we should help other nonprofits in this space. If I can strengthen the family unit, then I'm directly impacting the quality of life for our kids. If there are things like food insecurity or literacy gaps or other social issues that we feel we can help, then it's our responsibility to do so. So what we've done over the last several years is certainly kind of widened the offering of what we do. And as an entrepreneur, what it looks like in our organization is almost as if we have multiple nonprofits within our org chart that are streamlined. So Yes is a great example. We treat that as if it's a standalone nonprofit, but it doesn't need a separate executive director, a separate finance team, a separate board of directors with 990s and insurance and all that. Like, we can streamline those processes. But I treat it as if I'm the CEO of just that organization. Our College Bound initiative could be its own standalone nonprofit in Orange County. Its budget alone of what we invest in College Bound is probably bigger than most budgets for the average nonprofit here in Orange County. The staff is almost 20 staff that are serving this year about 8,000 high school age students.
Yeah, but Robert, you're getting way ahead.
Yeah.
So I'm the excitement of your growth, not only in territory but in services, is what you're
Correct.
sharing. So to complete that, how did you add Orange and Anaheim, Cypress, Buena Park?
Thank you. So our first merger with the harbor area, Costa Mesa, Irvine, Newport, we saw cost savings in that first merger when you eliminated the redundancy of executives and buying power, things like that. So that first year, we were able to add more staff to existing sites in Santa Ana, Costa Mesa, Irvine, and Newport. We also expanded at the same time that we did a merger. We expanded into the city of Orange. There was no Boys and Girls Club in the city of Orange. And so we went to the school district and we introduced our College Bound program. Within about a year, the city of Orange had asked us to then bid out for school contracts. And so we expanded in the city of Orange and into these other cities strictly from the business efficiencies of our first merger. After the Yes merger, we went into discussions with the Boys and Girls Club of Anaheim, Cypress, who had recently, a couple years earlier, gone through a merger, and they had been seeing a lot of our success and growth. And we've already collaborated. And I've known their CEOs, various CEOs over the years, and so the board was really in line with us around a kind of a bigger vision. And so we went into that process and just excited that we were able to complete a merger a little over a year ago. And then within 30 days of that merger being announced publicly, it was a big announcement. The Boys and Girls Club of Buena Park board reached out and said, "Hey, we'd like to be a part of what's happening."
No,
Yeah.
very exciting. It is interesting. I do worry about kind of that traditional nonprofit structure of every city having their YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, their women's club, the different narrowly affiliated entities, and how that model can uh, not just grow, but stay in business if you're also dealing with the same pool of donors, the same pool of engaged people. And I think every city has that pool of folks. Are they getting older? Maybe. So how do you encourage younger people to participate in that nonprofit world?
Yeah.
But also, how do you make sure you change and grow that service, that level of service that you're providing, to keep on track of how the world is changing?
Yeah.
And I certainly see a lot of that with you. And I'm excited about Anaheim. Michael Baker, of course, is my call out to the guy who was executive director of Anaheim when I was mayor, and that he left the county. So I don't know what happened to him other than serving in Santa Barbara. But the the changes that have occurred in communities, you're pointing out to some of those changes that the services that you provide have changed the Boys and Girls Club,
Yes.
growing and expanding. But what are some of those basic services that people wouldn't expect to see at a Boys and Girls Club today?
Great. Well, thank you for that. And, Mike Baker's a close friend, and he's actually CEO of the Boys and Girls Club in Bend, Oregon, right now. For the
Oh,
Boys.
Bend, Ocean.
Yeah.
Okay, and he keeps traveling north, I guess.
Yeah, I'll put it into a few different kind of buckets. So I think most people know that we do after school programs. So we operate after school programs in our buildings, right? The Boys and Girls Club facilities, and in a wide network of schools through the various school districts that we have here in Orange County. And so we serve a few thousand kids strictly through that model after school. Obviously during spring break, winter break, and summer, we're kind of open all day.
And I think that's what a lot of people
So a lot of people know us.
assume is what the Boys and Girls Club does.
One of our biggest areas of growth has been in that middle school to high school age kind of category, because the average Boys and Girls Club, and we've seen these trends for several years, after like age 13, teens kind of, they have other things to do.
Right.
And so they don't always go to the Boys and Girls Club. So what we started to do over the last decade or so is introduce kind of a new model. It's a network of teen centers that, are designed specifically for that group to come in, and it's their own space. It's designed differently. It's got a different brand. But it's also us being on campus. So we're on campus at almost 20 high schools. And so these are structured agreements that we build with school districts where we use private dollars, right? Philanthropy and, funders that will help fuel this. We go to these school districts and we secure these agreements that essentially are almost like real estate contracts, where they're providing the space, we provide the funding, they're providing us data and access to these young people. What it allows us to do is I don't have to go build a ton of more facilities and maintain them and all that. I can get directly onto a high school campus where these students are at. I can work in partnership with high school counselors and teachers and administrators. And through that model alone, we've seen that service area grow from maybe 100 or so teens throughout a year to now probably 6,000-7,000, this year alone. And we literally haven't seen the cap to that. We can serve
probably the area that needs that support more than any other group.
Yeah, and it also allows us to just meet these young people where they're at, and eliminate some of these obstacles of like, how do they get to us and things like that. But that College Bound is, to put it simply, case management. We're working with these high school students. It's consulting. We train our staff as consultants to work one-to-one with high school students, help them kind of figure out what their passion, what their pathway might be. If you say, I'm interested in being an engineer, okay, let's look at what schools might have a really good engineering program. Let's look at, what the cost of that might be. And what we do is we help these young people kind of navigate that process. We don't answer it for them. We're not here to, get them all into one specific school. We're here to help them build these life skills. And so it's consulting. If you lived in a more affluent community here in Orange County, you might be able to hire someone like this for one of your kids. We provide that at no cost to families here in Orange County. And so part of it is kind of advising them around their future path. Then once they get into junior, senior year, it's helping them with applications to colleges or trade programs. We want them to apply to as many colleges and universities that might be of their interest. If there's a fee associated with the application, we'll pay for that fee. Once they get accepted, it's working with them and their families on selecting the school that might be the best fit. The average college-bound member for us is getting 5 to 6 acceptance letters. And so then we help kind of with the family navigate what's the difference. And a few years ago, Curt, I felt like I was like a sports agent. We had a few universities kind of fighting over each other for one of our kids. And they were, our staff were kind of in between. And so I was kind of involved as well. And I just felt like, what a great place to be.
Yeah, exactly.
That these prestigious universities, I won't name them, we're literally like, we want this young lady to come to our school. We're willing to offer this, this, and this. And then the other school would say, well, we're willing to offer, this support here. And, that's what it should be, right? These kids are so bright. The missing ingredient was that support system, right?
That knowledge of how to work that system.
And the last 2 phases is funding, right? One of the obstacles for a young person going to college might be financial, right? And so we have our all scholarship program. So this year we're going to award almost $400,000 directly from the Boys and Girls Sub to these young people graduating high school, going to college. And so we have our own scholarship fund, but the bigger pot of money is financial aid. So our staff will help these young people apply for financial aid. On average, we're securing $2.5 to $3 million a year in financial aid for these young kids. And, that to us is direct impact. We're finding kids that are college bound, but there's something missing. And the average high school, as I have a huge amount of respect for our school partners and educators, but the average high school has like 400 to 600 students assigned to a counselor, and these kids aren't getting that type of relationship. And so this model was really developed for scalability and effectiveness. So our college-bound advisors are on campus working directly next to high school counselors, and we're getting these kids into college. 99% of our college-bound members are getting accepted into a 2 or 4 year college, university. 100% of our kids are leaving with some plan for their future. The average kid is getting like $25,000 a year in financial aid. And so these metrics are driving us, having the ability to then go to new schools and say, look what we're doing here. How do we bring that service, model to more communities?
Yes. So is every community you serve, every city, there's a different array of programs available, or do they?
Yeah, I would say, we have an operating model, right? I think all of us have our own operating model, similar to what you might have on your device or your phone. Like, we have an operating model, what you stand for and kind of what it is that you do. And so after school programs, college bound, our workforce development, we have our family strengthening initiatives, which is, it's a network of almost 100 nonprofits that we bring into all of our facilities that serve the whole family. So English classes, financial literacy programs, food, we have vision screening for kids. We have dental services that we bring in a few times a year. We have adults that have never been to the dentist, and they'll get their checkup at our Boys and Girls Clubs. So depending on the site, will determine the concentration of those resources. So certain communities, like in Anaheim, Santa Ana, certain pockets of Costa Mesa, certain pockets of Orange, the need is greater. And so we're concentrating more resources into those communities. But every club is getting some form of family strengthening. Every family could benefit from budgeting courses. Every family can benefit from grief counseling and services like that. Not every community necessarily needs English as a second language, but these fundamental commitments that we're making. We're here to strengthen the family. We're here to make sure that all kids are safe. That's pretty consistent. Every community we serve gets kind of that.
So, and therefore, the big question a lot of people have is how do you pay for all that, right?
Yeah.
And how has fundraising changed, over the last 10, 20 years? It's kind of funny from a political model. What I think is very ironic is technology has changed how you raise money in a lot of these. I mean, politicians used to get money from local business people, neighbors and friends, and small donations, then the rise of PACs and political action committees, and then big dollars in politics. And now if you look at the most money raised on a federal level really is all small donor based,
Correct.
where you can target people and they can give a reoccurring $20 check or $20
Yeah.
transfer of funds or $10 transfer of funds a month or something like that. And, I think a lot of models are taking advantage of that, different techniques, different ways to raise money.
Yeah. It's certainly just like an ever changing, ever evolving, approach. You know, Years and years ago when I first started the Boys and Girls Sub, I was kind of laser focused around the concentration of risk, right? And it's something that's always in the back of my mind is making sure that we're not highly dependent on one thing.
Yep.
The challenge is sometimes you have this incredible opportunity. Someone's going to fund something, or you get a contract that will significantly impact that ratio. And the right thing to do is based on several factors, right? I agree with you completely in that the methods of how fundraising is secured for the nonprofit space has completely been revolutionized, right? And for a few reasons. One is there's a lot more nonprofits today than there ever have been, right? And so in my mind, that's a good thing because it allows people to find a cause that is personal to them. I think philanthropy should be personal, right? We may not be the cause that, is for everyone. Everyone should find the thing that just makes them feel good. I think that philanthropy is a selfish act, right? And what I mean by that is you feel good when you support something that you believe in, and that's why you want to do it again. And because you feel good, you want to, do more for that organization.
Right.
But things like online giving has completely revolutionized the accessibility for fundraising, right? You've made it exponentially easier, right? The traditional old school way of I'm sending you a letter,
Yeah.
and then you're gonna, write out a check, you that letter,
Yeah.
and then we, pre-postage on it and all that, and then we get that mail a couple weeks later, and then usually there's like a little code. But a lot of people don't know this, but someone had written like a little code to know what's working, not working, that sort of stuff. That model is not the way that things will be forever. Some folks are still giving in that way, but online giving, peer-to-peer campaigns is, if I say, Curt, you love the Boys and Girls Club, would you like to share it with your friends? We can create a little online page that's super easy for us to do, and then you send it out on Facebook or all your friends, and you say, I'm supporting the Boys and Girls Club, please join me, and it's got a little thermometer. That is an incredible way for us to kind of, activate, deputize
Personal
people, right?
connection.
Because I'm not asking, you're asking.
Right.
Here's the downside to that. The, accessibility is way better, but that personal touch between you and that organization is typically kind of lost. And so it is very possible that someone sees an ad or they get an email and they go, yeah, I like the Boys and Girls Club. And it was like that. We made it super easy. They gave a gift. But that same reaction that you used to get when you were writing that check and you had that kind of, moment isn't the same. You just literally clicked, purchase,
Right.
and the same dopamine didn't happen. So it is difficult in some cases to retain and engage that donor in the same way. And so I think there's always pros and cons to things. We just have to recognize as a nonprofit that while some of these tools are extremely useful for us, we may need to change our strategies for how we connect with those donors, how we steward them,
So could you share kind of the percentage of where, your budget comes from in terms of institutional groups or government versus large donors and small donors?
It certainly has changed, on a year-to-year basis, but right now we're roughly 50/50 is, um, kind of member, operations generated, and I'll explain what that is, and about 50% private philanthropy. And within that, there's a bunch of, pies in that pie chart. So within the operations, so we have facilities, right? And really nice facilities. So we generate, at a few of our facilities, rental income, what I would consider to be kind of passive. When the Boys and Girls Subs are not being used because kids are in school, we have other nonprofits, we have a couple charter schools that are using that space, and that generates, several $100,000 in passive revenue. We have, very little comes from like our members, because our core philosophy is to make sure that we're keeping our programs affordable
There for everybody.
and accessible. We offer automatic discounts for single family households, automatic discounts for first responders, police officers, teachers, nurses. We call it our heroes discount. We have automatic discounts for veterans. We don't really have a lot of active duty, but active duty veterans. And so our core philosophy is that's not how we're going to raise our budget. But in some of our communities like Newport Beach and Irvine, Costa Mesa, we're able to charge more than what we're able to charge in communities like Santa Ana. So in those communities like Newport, Irvine, Costa Mesa, parents are paying a tuition for programming, and it helps kind of fund the majority of what it takes to run those locations. What that means for us is that when I have to go raise private dollars, the private dollars are going towards the gaps in some of the communities where the parents can't afford to participate. We run a social enterprise, which is our sports leagues, right? In some of these communities, Newport, Irvine, Costa Mesa, we do a basketball program. We literally have second generation, dads that
Wow.
played, sports in our club's basketball.
Yeah, I recently saw your Irvine building, and that is a beautiful basketball court.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
My standards are very high for every program. Like,
For basketball or?
no, just in general, my standard is that I want every kid we serve to have the same experience that I expect from my own kids. But for those sports programs, they generate a profit, right? I treat it like a social enterprise. So it generates a profit, right? The basketball leagues in those cities, so that I can offer free or low cost sports in Santa Ana, in Orange, in Anaheim, where parents can't pay the $200 season fee. And so that model, because of the uniqueness of our market, and then I have clubs in different demographics, I can introduce something that is valuable. Parents are happy to pay, they can afford it, and it helps me ensure that I can offer the same services in other communities at no cost. So that's the operational side. And so that's around half the budget, about $7 million. And then the rest of it is through private philanthropy. And that's, we're doing a ton of events now. So there's golf and women's brunch and a gala and, things like that. We just had our breakfast this week. And so, that raises collectively a good amount of our budget is these kind of events. Those are great because it creates opportunities for people to engage and learn. And, a golf day is pretty easy. Usually everyone that's golfing in our golf tournament would have been golfing that day anyways. And so it wasn't a tough ask, but it creates sponsorship opportunities. But then we have individual donors. And so you mentioned like those folks that are giving, a couple $100, $1,000, personally. We have corporate giving, foundations, family foundations. And so collectively that makes up about another $7 million. Within that group, there's some major donors that make bigger investments. And what they're motivated by typically is, what's the big picture here? What are you investing in? How do you grow impact in some of these larger initiatives? These are folks that are typically have higher expectations of us around, we want to change the world. How can you show us how you're doing that at scale?
Yeah, and so changing the world though is keeps changing, and the how you impact that. I really think your perspective on how kids today are different than they were 20 years ago would be good. There's a lot of talk about mental health issues that affect people at a much younger age, and a lot of kids who grew up through, be it COVID or other life challenges or other issues,
Yeah.
or maybe more an acceptance today of discussing mental health issues than were certainly there in my day. No one ever talked about it. So some people would say, well, there were no mental health challenges, 50 years ago, but of course there were.
Yeah.
It's just how they are defined, and therefore, how do you address some of those new, fresh, needs that are being expressed to you?
I mean, it's like half of this is true and half of it is not. Like kids are always kids, right? Like whether you're growing up today or in the 1950s, like kids are kids. Like I think that's true. At the same time, like the environment completely changes constantly.
Right.
So it is different, right? Depending on what the environment is gonna certainly impact what your childhood looks like. And what we're seeing is because of the velocity of what changes today, right? Velocity is the speed and the direction of stuff. And the velocity of change is just at a higher rate than we've ever seen, right? It's
So true. You're right.
just disruption happening, technology, and that's all happening at a faster pace than ever before. And kids are in this kind of space.
So if it's a kid's life, right, when you're only 5 years old, that means more of your life has been impacted than if you were 50 years old. So those changes.
Imagine how hard it is for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Like we're adults and we struggle with, things that are happening in the environment, right? And remind yourself that these kids are not equipped the same way that we are at this point.
Right.
So it's both are true. There's still like core fundamental things that every young person needs that have always been the same thing. And to your point, every kid has experienced anxiety and these types of social issues. I will say probably the awareness that as adults now has certainly improved. We just know more about kids and the science of kids and the impact of these things. I think we're more aware and maybe there's less stigma to some of these things, right? Where like before it was like, go rub dirt on it, right? There's just more awareness.
Dirt
Like,
or turpentine pretty much did everything.
I think as a parent, like your goal is to never have anything that you say to your kid now end up in a therapy room 20 years from now. Like that's,
I think that's an impossible dream, though.
and so, now put it back in the lens of a CEO of a Boys and Girls Club. So, I have no higher obligation as the CEO of the club to ensure that every young person is safe, that they're thriving, that every person that I bring into this organization is the very best. And so that's all about standards and systems and culture and things like that, and then I have the lens of like, all right, what's happening in the world, right? There's all these opportunities in front of kids right now with the access to technology and AI and just the accessibility to information, right? Like it used to be that only certain groups of people had access to learning, right? Imagine like just, not that long ago in our history where like the only people that had access to go to school or to go to higher education were a limited few, right? Now, you don't even necessarily need to go to college or university. Like you have access to learning. I mean, the pathway to learning is just, there's no limit to it. And so that's such a huge opportunity. The downside to that is there's so many options. Sometimes the biggest challenge is like, I don't know which way to go with this. And,
Right.
There's a lot of folks, there's futurists that believe that these young people are going to have several careers in their lifetime.
Yeah.
There's futurists that believe that, the new economy will be less, I'm going to do this work for 40 years and work at this one place, and more like I'm going to become a personal brand. I'm going to have a skill that's going to be valuable, and I'm going to sell that skill to different, and so I can believe that there's the way that the economy is shifting, it will look much different, right? The day of you working at AT&T for 45 years is probably not going to be the case anymore. And so, as I speak about kids, I really speak about adaptability. It's teaching these young kids to be resilient and adaptable because that's the one skill. And I look at it even today when I hire people to work for us, I'm looking for like, can you handle tough things? Because we do tough things here. And can you adapt to change? Because I can promise you, I'm always going to be changing things here. And the people that can adapt the best are the ones that thrive.
Yeah, no, that's all good. That's very good. I have a few years ago, I had my little epiphany, and that was how weird we are as parents, or adults, when we look at our kids' performance in school and so forth. And it's like, if your kid comes home and has a 3 A's in these subjects, a B here, but has a C in science, what are you going to have them do over summer school?
Yeah.
And our heads are that normalizing everybody to a certain bar, whatever that is what we've been programmed to do as parents a lot, or as teachers. And yet, uh, my epiphany is that you need to find out that A, where the kid loves and wants to, be engaged all the time and is a strong performer, and expand that higher level skill, as
Yeah.
opposed to try to drag up that something he or she has less interest in. But I thought about that again recently when I heard you speak at your summit, where you're reaching for the future summit. I think that's what I was supposed to say. Uh, but it was really good because you also talked about creativity in that same context, and maybe you could share that.
Yeah, you know, I believed for the entire time that I've worked with young kids that they have a superpower that we don't have as adults sometimes, and that superpower is curiosity, right? My kids are 6 and 11, and I get random questions all the time from them. I got a new one the other day. What does the T stand for in T-shirt? And I got to tell you, I've never been so like if there possibly was like a little bit of smoke that kind of came out of my head because I was like it was like a short circuit because I had no idea how to answer that question. I looked it up later, and apparently there's theories that it's because the T-shirt kind of is in the shape of a T. I don't know, I don't know if that's exactly the right answer, but like kids are curious. They ask really good questions, and there's a study that I learned about from NASA. So NASA in the 1960s, we're in this space race. There's a lot of urgency around recruiting the best and brightest, right? And so they commissioned this research group to develop a creativity test so that they can really sift through who are the most creative engineers. Because what they knew was we don't know what the problems are going to be, but we're going to need people that can, solve these problems using creativity, right? And so they created this test, and that's how they were able to recruit the best and brightest. And then I don't know what the reason was, but someone said we should introduce this test with young kids. So they sampled 1,600 kindergarten students, and shockingly, 98% of the kids tested at the genius level of creativity. 98% of these kindergartners, and they were kind of really surprised. So then they came back 5 years later to those same kids, right? So now they're age 10, and that had dropped down from 98 to 30%, right? And then they came back 10 years later, age 15, and it had dropped down to 12%. And then they came back to them as adults in their early 20s, and only 2% of that original group had tested at a genius level of creativity. And what that tells us, I mean, I don't think that it's like when it's surprising, but then when you really kind of think about it, it's like, yeah, we condition kids and we kind of squash that creativity. After your kid's like, what's the T stand for in a T-shirt? You're like, I don't know, go look it up. If we keep doing those types of things, right? And, your example of, the grades that kids get, like, not that I don't believe that, giving performance checks for kids isn't important, but like, is that really what the goal is? Like, do you know what grades you got in third grade? Like, I don't know that those things really matter the way that we kind of treat them. And so I want us as a Boys and Girls Club to be the headquarters, the hub for innovation and creativity. This is where we should be encouraging that, because I believe to the core of who I am, and I'm not going to be alive to see this, all the way through. But like, the new skill will be, can you learn new skills, right? The things that I prioritize now, which I know will be prioritized in the future, is who's creative, who's resilient, who's, like, it doesn't matter if you know the answer to that thing. Like, that just means you know the answer to that one issue. But because everything is changing all the time,
Right.
the new skill is, can you kind of keep up with that? And I'll give you a real good real world example. My daughter's 11. Last year, she was, my wife's a teacher, and obviously I work with kids. So we have our huge amount of respect for teachers, right? So we kept getting these notices from this teacher. I won't say what she is, but she kept getting these notices from this teacher, like Olivia's not doing the best in this subject, and she's not getting her homework done, and we're just like, what? And so I remember for weeks we kept kind of coming down on my daughter, and like, it's not acceptable. You have to do your homework. You have to keep up with this. And she's in soccer and she's in dance and all that, and she was staying up till 9 or 10 o'clock sometimes, and we were, at that time we were taking the teacher's feedback and really, taking it to heart. And we were coming down on her, and she was struggling. And then I finally told my wife, we need to meet with this teacher and just find out what's happening here, because this is just not, our daughter's not the type that just kind of lets these things, go and isn't paying attention. We meet with the teacher, and within 5 minutes, we realize that she's the problem, right? She just has a completely different philosophy around this, and she just keeps assigning this work. And we know, because of the work that we do, there's a certain formula for how many minutes of homework a kid should get, depending on the grade level. And she was just completely off. And so in the meeting, I just said, yeah, she's not going to do this stuff. I stood by my daughter in that moment and said, I'm very comfortable with her being involved in soccer and dance and having those things. If you're going to give her that grade, I'm perfectly fine with it. We're not asking for accommodation. She's going to do what she can do, but I'm not going to let the grade be the thing that I stress out, or my daughter stresses out about. We know she's a great student. We know she was like academically where she was supposed to be, but that was a good example of like, we're squashing that and we're prioritizing these other things. And as I think about kids, like, there's enough on their plate. I want them to be kids and enjoy that. And that's why things like robotics and 3D printers and,
Exciting, fun thing.
let's build stuff,
Stimulates.
challenges are, a lot of what we do at the Boys and Girls Clubs are like project-based challenges, right? It's for kids, put in an environment, we give them a problem to solve, we give them some general direction, and we just let them figure it out. And, I think part of the reason that we squash creativity is because as you get older, you start to be more cautious of failure, and you want to avoid, failing at stuff. You want to avoid being wrong, and I'm sure there's a feeling where you raise your hand, you give the answer, it's wrong, and you shrink down. And that's not the way we should be looking at this. I mean, at the end of the day, like, you and I don't hit bullseyes on everything, and
Right.
that's the only way we learn. But in the environment that they're in, that's not really the culture
Right.
that we see, and so we want to change that.
Yeah. And you're changing a lot and doing a lot for the kids of Orange County. So thank you. And thanks for coming in, Robert.
Thank you very much for having me.